Story 1. Ashfield Hollow was the kind of town people forgot existed, tucked between two forgotten highways, surrounded by endless miles of skeletal birch trees and black soil that smelled of rain and rot. It was a place where things lingered too long, fog, whispers, and the memory of what happened that one October 20 years ago. Every fall, crows gathered by the hundreds on the power lines above the town's main street. They perched silently, their dark eyes reflecting the pale autumn light. Locals said it started the year the children disappeared, the same year the Ashfield Hollow Fairgrounds closed for good. That year, the crows never left. Detective Ivy Rourke leaned against her car, watching the birds wheel overhead in a black storm of motion. She wasn't supposed to be here. The Ashfield disappearances were cold cases buried under 20 years of dust and excuses. But the email she'd received 3 nights ago changed that. It had no subject line, no sender, just 3 words, "They never left." And attached to it, a single photo, taken just days ago. It showed the rusting sign of the old Ashfield Fairgrounds. And in the center of the image, tied to the signpost with a red ribbon, was a small child's shoe. Inside the Ashfield diner, the smell of burnt coffee and grease clung to the air. Ivy sat in a corner booth, her notepad open, watching the few patrons scattered across the room. Old faces, worn by the years, pretending not to look at her. "You're Rourke, right? The one from Cold Case Division?" The voice came from a man who looked like the diner itself, aged, cracked, and haunted. Sheriff Emmett Dawes, long retired but still wearing his badge like it meant something. "I heard you were coming," he said, sliding into the booth opposite her. "Didn't think anyone care enough to reopen this mess." "I didn't reopen it," Ivy said quietly. "It reopened itself." She slid the photo across the table. "This was taken last week. Do you recognize it?" Dawes froze. His weathered hand hovered over the image, eyes narrowing. "Yeah," he said after a long silence. "That's where they found the last one." He told her everything he remembered, the 5 missing kids from 2005, all between 8 and 12 years old. The night of the fair. The lights went out during the fireworks. When they came back on, 5 children were gone. Only one was ever found. Lydia Kress, Dawes said, his voice low. She showed up 2 days later on the edge of the woods, barefoot, covered in mud. Couldn't talk for weeks. When she finally did, all she said was... He paused. The crows outside shrieked suddenly, as if on cue. She said, "The man with the feathers took them." That phrase, "the man with the feathers," stuck in Ivy's head as she drove toward the old fairgrounds that evening. The road twisted through dense woods, trees closing in until the sky vanished entirely. Her headlights caught the flash of eyes now and then, animals, maybe. Or not. The fairgrounds were a graveyard of memories. Tilt-a-whirl seats half swallowed by moss. Booths collapsed into themselves. And the smell, wet rust and earth. Ivy found the sign easily, just like in the photo. The red ribbon was still there, though the shoe was gone. She crouched beside it. Someone had carved a small symbol into the wood. A circle surrounded by feather-like lines, perfectly symmetrical. A noise behind her made her freeze. A flutter of wings. She turned. Hundreds of crows sat silently along the ruined fence, watching her. Every single one facing the same direction, toward the old mirror tent at the center of the grounds. The tent that, according to the records, was where the power first went out 20 years ago. Inside, the air was heavy with dust and something metallic. The cracked mirrors still hung in warped frames, reflecting twisted images of her flashlight beam. She moved deeper, every creak echoing. Then she saw it, scratched into one of the mirrors with what looked like a nail. 5 for 1. He'll come again when the sky bleeds. Ivy's heart pounded. She lifted her camera, took a photo, then froze as a faint sound rose behind her. A whisper. "So, Charlotte, it's almost time." The beam of her flashlight flickered. And for one impossible second, reflected in the mirror, she saw 5 small figures standing behind her. But when she turned, nothing. Only crows. Dozens of them. Perched silently on the broken carousel. And in the distance, thunder rolled, though the sky was clear. Back in town, Ivy found Lydia Kress. She was 30 now, living in her childhood home, rarely seen outside. Her hair hung in tangled waves, her eyes sunken but alert. "You shouldn't have come," Lydia said the moment Ivy stepped onto the porch. "They watch the roads this time of year." "Who does?" Ivy asked. Lydia's gaze drifted past her, to the treeline beyond the yard. The ones who never left. That night, Ivy couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. From her motel window, she could see the fairgrounds in the distance. A single light flickered there, faint, golden, and rhythmic, like a lantern swinging back and forth. She zoomed in with her camera. At first, she thought it was a trick of the light. Then she realized what she was seeing. A tall figure in black, walking the edge of the woods. His coat shimmered in the dim light, shifting like feathers in the wind. Turned just for a moment, and though his face was pale and human, his shadow stretched behind him in the unmistakable shape of a crow's wings. The light went out, and the crows began to scream. Morning came gray and cold, as if the sun itself refused to rise over Ashfield Hollow. The crows were still there, perched on the motel roof, on the street lamps, on the skeletal trees outside. Detective Ivy Rourke sat at the edge of her bed, the sound of their wings muffled through the thin walls. She hadn't slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw those 5 figures reflected in the mirror tent. Motionless, watching her. Now, as the mist began to crawl across the empty parking lot, she forced herself to focus. There were 5 names. 5 children. Eli Cartner, age 8. Ruby Lansing, age 9. Jamie Lowe, age 10. Hannah Pierce, age 11. Caleb Dean, age 12. All vanished on October 14, 2005. All presumed dead. And now, 20 years later, someone was sending her photos from the same fairgrounds, tying a child's shoe to the old sign. This wasn't coincidence. Someone wanted her here. The town library sat at the edge of Main Street, half buried under vines and neglect. Ivy stepped inside, brushing damp leaves from her coat. The old floorboards groaned in protest. Behind the counter, a frail woman with cloudy eyes looked up. "Morning," Ivy said, flashing her badge. "Detective Rourke. I'm looking for any archived material about the Ashfield Fair of 2005. The woman didn't blink. "You're not the first to come asking about that year." "Really? Who else?" "A man," she whispered, tall pale, always came around the same time each October. Said he was researching local folklore. "Did he give a name?" The woman shook her head. "Only said he was the keeper." Ivy spent the next 3 hours poring through newspaper clippings and photos. A headline caught her eye. 5 children missing at Ashfield Fair. Police suspect foul play. Below it, a photo of Sheriff Emmett Dawes, 20 years younger, standing near the fair's carousel. Behind him, she noticed something odd, barely visible among the fair lights. A man in a long black coat. Head tilted. Eyes glowing faintly in the reflection of a nearby mirror. The same silhouette she'd seen at the edge of the woods last night. She scanned more reports, eyewitness accounts, police statements, rumor columns. One detail kept repeating. The night of the disappearance, several people reported seeing crows circling the fairgrounds hours before the fireworks began. And after the lights went out, witnesses described hearing children laughing in the woods. Laughing, but not screaming. Ivy drove to the northern edge of town, where the forest thickened into an endless web of black branches. Her tires crackled over frost. The GPS lost signal a mile in. At the end of the road, an old sign leaned sideways. Private property, Ashfield Forest Reserve. It was there she found Tommy Hurst, a park ranger who looked like he'd been carved out of the same bark as the trees. He greeted her with suspicion and a cigarette. "Detective Rourke," she said, offering her badge. "I'm looking into the disappearances back in '05. You were stationed here back then, weren't you?" Tommy squinted. "Yeah. Don't know what good it'll do. Those kids are long gone." "Maybe not," Ivy said. "You found something 2 years ago. A shoe. Half buried by the trail near the ravine." His jaw tightened. "I didn't report that." "No, but someone did." Ivy held up her phone, showing a screenshot of a forum post she'd found earlier that morning. You posted about it on an urban legends thread, the hollow that eats time. Said you found a child's shoe tied with a red ribbon. Same as the one in this photo. Tommy's face went pale. He dropped the cigarette, crushing it under his boot. Listen, I shouldn't have written that, he muttered. People come out here, thinking it's some damn ghost story. But you don't understand, detective, something lives in these woods. It doesn't want to be found. Something? Ivy asked. Or someone? He hesitated. Both. They walked the trail together. The forest was silent except for the wind sighing through the trees. This is where I found it, Tommy said finally, stopping near a cluster of birch trees. The ground was carpeted in dead leaves, slick and copper-colored. He pointed to a mound of earth near the roots of an old oak. Right there. The shoe was sticking out. Looked fresh, like it hadn't been buried long. Ivy crouched, running her gloved hands through the soil. Something hard knocked against her fingers. A small, round object. She dug it free and froze. It was a music box, shaped like a carousel horse. The paint was chipped, but when she wound the crank, it began to play a slow, tinny lullaby. Then it clicked open on its own. Inside was a single crow feather, black and glossy, and beneath it, carved into the metal, were 5 tiny initials. EC, ALJLHPCD. The missing children. Ivy's pulse hammered. Tommy, we need to... But when she turned, he was gone. Only his flashlight lay on the ground, beam cutting through the fog. Tommy, she called. No answer. Then she heard it, softly at first, like rain through leaves. Whispering voices. Children's voices. They came from beneath the ground. Ivy stepped back, scanning the forest. The whispers grew louder, rising into laughter, high, echoing, distorted by distance. She pointed her flashlight at the mound. The soil was trembling, shifting, as if something beneath was moving. The laughter turned to crying. She dropped to her knees, scraping away leaves and dirt. Her heart pounded harder with each handful until she uncovered a small wooden box. The same shape, same carvings as the music box, only this one was nailed shut. She pried it open. Inside, wrapped in faded cloth, were 5 photographs. Each photo showed one of the missing children standing near the fairgrounds, smiling toward the camera. But their eyes, each pair of eyes was scratched out. Beneath the photos, a note written in childish scrawl. He said we could come back when the leaves turned red. The ground shifted again. Something thudded from below, slow, rhythmic, like knocking. Thump, thump, thump. Then Ivy saw the soil split open a few feet away, as if something was forcing its way up. Her instincts screamed at her to run, but her legs wouldn't move. The knocking grew louder until finally, a pale hand broke through the dirt. Fragile, child. She stumbled backward, drawing her gun. The hand clawed upward, fingers curling in the air, reaching for something unseen. Then another hand appeared beside it. Then another. 5 in total, all grasping at the open air, before falling still. Ivy's breath hitched. She edged closer, her flashlight trembling. The soil around the hands was moving again, shifting, writhing, until one of the fingers twitched. And then, a voice, thin, breathless, and impossibly close. Help us, he's still here. The crows exploded from the trees all at once, screaming into the gray sky. The forest went dark. Her flashlight flickered once, twice, then died. When the light came back, the hands were gone. So was the box. So was Tommy. Only the music box remained, lying in the dirt, its lullaby slowing, distorting, warping into silence. Ivy stumbled back to her car hours later, mud streaked up her arms, her mind spinning. She drove straight to the sheriff's office, demanding access to old files. Inside the dusty archives, she found the original evidence logs from 2005. Page after page of reports, missing persons, witness statements, found items. One entry caught her eye. Item number 27, children's music box recovered at scene. Contained black feather and engraved initials. Evidence lost during transfer to state facility. Her blood ran cold. This wasn't the first music box. Someone had been placing them, burying them, ever since. And there was one detail in the log that she hadn't seen before. At the bottom, scrawled in pen, someone had added a single line. The keeper returns every 20 years. That night, Ivy drove to Lydia Cress's house again. She pounded on the door until it creaked open. Lydia stood there, trembling, clutching a lantern. "You found them, didn't you?" Lydia whispered. "What are they?" Ivy demanded. "What's happening here?" Lydia shook her head, eyes filling with tears. "They were never meant to leave the hollow. He keeps them until the clock turns red." "What clock?" Lydia stepped back, pointing to the mantel. A small, ornate clock sat there, its hands frozen at 12:14. "The time they disappeared," Lydia said. "He calls it the feeding minute. When the leaves fall, the hollow takes what it's owed." "And the children?" Lydia's voice cracked. "They're under the leaves, detective, waiting for the sky to bleed again." From outside came the sound of wings. Thousands of them. Lydia's lantern flickered. Shadows moved against the windows, long, spindly shapes, shifting like feathers in the dark. Then came the laughter again, high, echoing and wrong. Ivy turned toward the door, gun raised. The knob began to turn on its own. And as it opened, the lantern light caught a pale face in the doorway, smiling. It was Tommy, only his eyes were black as ink. And perched on his shoulder was a single crow. The lantern dropped from Lydia Cress's trembling hand, shattering on the floor. The flame sputtered, then died, leaving the house cloaked in a murky orange glow from the single remaining bulb above the staircase. Ivy Rourke took a step back, gun still raised, as the figure in the doorway, Tommy Hurst, smiled that too wide smile. "Tommy," she said carefully, "step inside slowly." He didn't move. The crow on his shoulder tilted its head, its beady eyes reflecting the dim light. When Tommy finally spoke, his voice sounded hollow, distant, like an echo from somewhere far away. "They're hungry, detective," he murmured. "You shouldn't have opened the ground. Tommy, listen to me. We can help you." He shook his head, a soft laugh escaping his lips. "No one helps in Ashfield Hollow. You feed it, or you join it." Then his eyes rolled upward, revealing nothing but black. The crow screeched and launched itself into the house, beating its wings violently. The room filled with the sound of feathers and flapping and Lydia's screams. Ivy fired once into the air, shattering a hanging light fixture. The crow vanished through a cracked window. When she turned back to the doorway, Tommy was gone. Only a trail of black feathers led down the steps, into the fog beyond the porch. Lydia collapsed against the wall, shaking uncontrollably. "He's one of them now," she whispered. "The hollow takes what it wants, and it always starts with the ones who dig too deep." Ivy holstered her gun. "You're going to tell me everything. Now." Lydia's eyes darted to the broken window, then back to Ivy. "You don't understand. He doesn't want me to tell you." "Who?" "The keeper." According to Lydia, the legend of the keeper of Ashfield Hollow was older than the town itself. The first settlers in the 1800s spoke of a man who appeared every 20 years when the leaves began to fall. He offered prosperity, good harvests, and safety, so long as the town gave him 5 children. They called it the Feast of Shadows, Lydia said, a ritual of blood and time. The chosen children were taken during the autumn fair, the night when the veil was thinnest. He promised to keep them in his hollow, safe and eternal. The townsfolk, they agreed, detective. They made a deal. "That's insane," Ivy said. "You're telling me an entire town willingly gave up their children?" Lydia's eyes glistened with tears. "It's not insanity when you think it's salvation." Ivy stayed long enough to calm Lydia, then left as dawn began to break. The fog clung to the ground like wet silk, the roads empty except for the endless rows of crows perched along the telephone wires. They seemed to follow her car as she drove, moving in waves, black silhouettes against the rising sun. By the time she reached the sheriff's office, the parking lot was full of dead leaves that hadn't been there the night before. Inside, Sheriff Dawes was waiting. He looked like he hadn't slept in a week. "Heard you had company last night," he said grimly. "You knew about this, didn't you?" Ivy snapped. "The ritual. The keeper. All of it." Dawes stared at her, lips tightening. There are things you don't want to wake up, Rourke. This town, it lives off what it buries. Then start digging, she said, slamming the music box onto his desk. Because whatever's buried isn't staying down. He stared at it for a long time. That's the same one I saw back in '05. We sent it to the state lab, never came back. I found it near the ravine, along with 5 photographs of the missing children. Dawes sighed heavily, rubbing his temples. Back then, I thought it was some sick collector's game. But after the 5th kid went missing, I started seeing him too. The keeper? Dawes nodded. A tall man in a black coat. Showed up after every disappearance. Nobody could get close. He never left footprints, never spoke. Just watched. Ivy's phone buzzed. An unknown number. She answered and froze. Static. Then a child's voice, faint and distant. Detective Rourke, come back to the fair. She tried to respond, but the line filled with the sound of wings, thousands of them, and the connection went dead. By noon, she was standing again before the gates of the old Ashfield Fairgrounds. The air was unnaturally still, heavy with the smell of damp earth and something sweet, like decayed fruit. The Ferris wheel loomed ahead, its rusted spokes creaking faintly in the wind. She moved carefully between the collapsed booths and overgrown paths until she reached the carousel. It was exactly as she'd left it, except now, the horses were moving. Slowly, rhythmically. Round and round, without music, without power. Ivy's breath caught. She lifted her gun, circling the ride, eyes darting between the shadows. Then she saw them. 5 small figures. Standing in a perfect circle around the carousel, faces hidden beneath black veils made of feathers. Their heads tilted in unison as she approached. "Who are you?" she demanded. One of them stepped forward. A girl, no older than 10. Her voice was soft, echoing, as though spoken from the bottom of a well. "We are what's left when the hollow feeds." Ivy took a step back, her finger tightening on the trigger. "What do you want from me?" The girl lifted her hand, pointing toward the carousel. "He does." The carousel jerked to a stop. The center column began to creak, turning by itself. The mirrors lining it flickered, reflecting something that wasn't Ivy, something taller, cloaked in feathers, its face hidden beneath a long-beaked mask. A whisper filled the air, low and ancient. 5 for 1, 5 for 1. Ivy raised her weapon. "Show yourself." The mirrors shattered all at once. Shards of glass rained down around her like a storm of silver rain. And in the center of the wreckage he appeared. The keeper. Tall, impossibly thin, his coat shifting like wings in the wind. His face was pale, eyes hollow pits that seemed to suck in the light. He moved toward her without sound, leaving no footprints in the dirt. Ivy fired. Twice. The bullets passed straight through him, thudding uselessly into the carousel frame. He tilted his head. "Time always repeats, detective. The hollow remembers its debt." She stumbled backward. "You took them, those children, why?" "To keep the world balanced," he said, voice calm, melodic, almost soothing. 5 hearts every 20 years, to keep the hollow asleep. You've disturbed the rhythm. Now it must feed again." The 5 veiled children began to hum, a soft, eerie tune that twisted into the same melody the music box had played. The sound grew louder, vibrating through the air, through Ivy's bones. She covered her ears, backing away, but the world around her began to distort, the fairgrounds flickering between past and present. For a split second, she saw the fair alive again, lights flashing, laughter echoing, the smell of popcorn and candy. Then darkness. And blood. The laughter turned to screaming. Children running. Parents shouting names. And through the chaos, the keeper walked calmly, feathers trailing behind him as he touched each child's forehead. One by one, they vanished into the air. The vision snapped. Ivy was back in the ruins, gasping. The keeper stood inches from her now. "You've seen the truth," he whispered. "Now you understand what you must do." She tried to raise her gun, but he reached out, pressing one gloved finger to her chest. Cold flooded through her veins. "You will be my herald, Ivy Rourke." the one who prepares the next feast. When she came to, the fairgrounds were silent again. No children. No keeper. The carousel lay in ruins. Her gun was gone. On the ground beside her was a single object, another music box, still playing faintly. But this one was different. Inside, instead of a feather, was a photograph of Ivy herself, taken from behind, at the very moment she'd entered the fairgrounds. And beneath it, a new inscription carved into the metal. 5 for 1. The feast begins again. That evening, Sheriff Dawes found Ivy sitting outside the diner, mud covering her boots, eyes unfocused. "You look like hell," he said gently. She didn't respond. Just handed him the music box. Dawes turned it over in his hands, frowning. "Where'd you find this?" "I didn't," Ivy whispered. "It found me." A single crow landed on the table between them, dropping a piece of red ribbon onto the music box before taking off into the sky. Dawes stared after it, his voice barely a whisper. "He's come back, hasn't he?" Ivy looked up, eyes dark with exhaustion and fear. "No," she said. "He never left." That night, the people of Ashfield Hollow awoke to the sound of wings beating across the rooftops. The crows screamed until dawn. And when the sun rose, 5 names appeared on the church door. 5 names. All children. Each written in black feathers. By the 4th night after the harvest fair, Coldwater Hollow had gone quiet in a way that felt wrong. Not the peaceful kind of quiet that came when dusk fell over the fields, but a suffocating, expectant stillness, like the land itself was waiting for something to happen. The air hung heavy with the smell of damp soil and dying crops. Mist rolled in from the woods earlier than usual, curling low along the ground, creeping up the front steps of homes, and seeping into the seams of old windows. Detective Nathan Cole stood at the edge of the hollow, staring into the shrouded trees. He'd been there for nearly an hour, flashlight trembling slightly in his hand. The wind whispered through the leaves in a strange, rhythmic pattern, almost like words forming just out of earshot. "Nathan!" He turned sharply. The beam of his light cut across the mist, landing on nothing but drifting fog. His heart hammered against his ribs. He'd been hearing it for 2 nights now, the voice. Always faint. Always just beyond the reach of reason. At first, he thought it was exhaustion. But the more he came out here, the clearer it became. It wasn't imagination. It was calling him by name. Earlier that day, the sheriff's office had received another report, another family missing. The Wilkes family, gone without a trace from their farmhouse at the northern edge of town. Dinner still on the table, a candle still burning in the window. Nathan and Sheriff Mallory had searched the property, finding no signs of a struggle. Just a trail of wet leaves leading from the back porch toward the woods. The same woods that had swallowed 3 families in less than a month. "I don't like this," Mallory said quietly as they followed the trail. "The leaves, they look arranged, like someone placed them in a pattern." Nathan knelt, brushing his hand over the dark soil. She was right. The leaves weren't scattered naturally. They formed a spiral, tight, precise, almost ceremonial. And in the center, buried halfway in the earth, was something small and pale. A doll's head. Its eyes were missing. That night, Nathan couldn't sleep. The whispers wouldn't stop. He sat in his living room with a half-empty bottle of whiskey, the old town maps spread out across the table. Red pins marked every disappearance, every strange sighting, every report of distant laughter in the trees. The lines connecting them formed a circle. And in the center of that circle lay Coldwater Hollow. He leaned back, running his hands through his hair. "What are you trying to tell me?" he muttered to the silence. Then came the sound again. A faint scratching at the back door. He froze. The scratching grew louder, slow, deliberate, like fingers dragging along the wood. He grabbed his flashlight and moved toward the door. "Nathan!" This time, the voice was unmistakable. A child's whisper, soft and close. He yanked the door open. No one there. Just the fog. And in the center of his porch, muddy footprints. Leading away toward the hollow. By dawn, Nathan had made up his mind. He packed his bag, flashlight, revolver, recorder, and an old journal he'd borrowed from the Coldwater Historical Society. The journal belonged to Reverend Abel Crane, dated 1871. The last entry described the Feast of Shadows and the pact sealed beneath the leaves. Most of it was written in strange, archaic language, but one passage had caught Nathan's attention. When the children's laughter ceases and the lanterns grow dim, the hollow will whisper for new souls to feed its roots. He didn't know what it meant, but he had a feeling he was about to find out. The hollow wasn't a place most people went willingly. It was an expanse of sunken land at the edge of the woods, where the ground dipped and the trees grew twisted, their roots tangled like veins. Nathan pushed through the fog, the beam of his flashlight cutting across moss-covered stones and half-buried carvings. He found the remnants of something, an old foundation, circular, overgrown. In the center stood a single, gnarled tree, blackened by age and lightning. It was the same tree that appeared in every missing persons file. The same one that Reverend Crane had called the mouth of the hollow. Nathan approached slowly, his recorder switched on. This is Detective Nathan Cole, Coldwater PD, November 5, 2025. Location Eastern Ridge, known locally as the Hollow. Investigating multiple missing person cases. I've found what appears to be the site of some kind of ritual ground. The wind shifted. Leaves rustled in a circle around him, spiraling upward before falling again. And then he heard it. Children's voices. Laughing. He spun around, flashlight trembling. The laughter echoed from everywhere and nowhere, carried on the wind. Nathan. He turned toward the tree. There, half buried among the roots, was another doll. Its face carved crudely from wood. Its eyes, two small black stones. Nathan crouched and brushed away the dirt. As he did, a faint glow pulsed beneath the soil. He jerked back, heart pounding. The glow spread, forming shapes, circles and symbols, faintly burning through the ground. And then the whispers began again, dozens of voices overlapping, pleading, crying, laughing. Let us out. Stay with us. The leaves remember. Nathan stumbled back, tripping over a root. His flashlight flickered, then died. Darkness swallowed him whole. When the light came back, it wasn't from his flashlight. It was from lanterns, dozens of them, hanging from the trees. The air shimmered with faint gold light, revealing figures among the mist. Children, standing perfectly still. Their faces pale, eyes hollow, their small hands clasped together. Nathan froze. One of them stepped forward. A girl, maybe 10 years old, her hair wet and tangled with leaves. She held out her hand. "Mr. Cole," she whispered. He couldn't move. "How do you know my name?" "You came when we called." He swallowed hard. "Where are your parents? What happened to you?" She tilted her head. "We're part of the hollow now. You can hear it, can't you? The whispering." The sound rose again, the rustling of leaves, the echo of faint voices carried on the wind. "It speaks to those who listen," she said. "It remembers everyone who's taken from it." Nathan's breath came shallow. Taken by who? The girl's expression changed. Sadness, then fear. By the one who feeds it. The ground beneath him shifted. The roots of the blackened tree began to move, writhing like serpents. The children backed away as something large stirred beneath the soil. Nathan stumbled toward the edge of the clearing, trying to keep his balance. The earth cracked open, and from within came a sound, deep, low, like 1,000 whispers at once. The roots curled upward, forming shapes, arms, a head, the faint outline of a body made of bark and shadow. The girl's voice trembled. "It's awake." Nathan raised his gun, though he knew it wouldn't help. The thing towering before him wasn't human. It was something ancient, something that had waited. The hollow's whisper became a scream. Nathan fired once, then again. The bullets vanished into the dark mass. The creature's shape dissolved into smoke, its voice echoing inside his head. "You listened too long, Nathan Cole." He fell to his knees, clutching his ears. Images flooded his mind, families dragged into the woods, children laughing as the earth swallowed them, Reverend Crane carving sigils into the soil. And then silence. When he opened his eyes, the lanterns were gone. The clearing was empty. Only the whisper remained. So endless. Calling his name. Hours later, the sheriff's department found Nathan's truck abandoned at the trailhead. His flashlight was lying in the mud, still on. His recorder was found beside it. The final seconds of the recording were faint, distorted by static. The hollow remembers. The children, under the leaves. Then, nothing. Only wind. Only whispers. And somewhere deep in Coldwater Hollow, beneath the tree that never died, a new lantern began to glow. Nathan Cole's. Morning broke cold and colorless over Coldwater Hollow. The mist clung stubbornly to the ground, turning every fence post and telephone line into a silhouette. Sheriff Mallory stood near the tree-line, her breath steaming in the air as she surveyed what was left of Nathan Cole's search site. His truck sat crooked in the ditch, driver's side door wide open, headlights still dimly glowing. The forest swallowed the road ahead in white fog. "Any sign of him?" she asked. Deputy Reese shook his head. No footprints past 20 yards. Like he just disappeared. Mallory crouched by the mud. There were indeed footprints, Nathan's boots, deep in the earth, leading straight toward the hollow. Then they simply stopped. No struggle. No return. Just absence. Her gut twisted. That's not possible. Reese hesitated, glancing toward the trees. "Sheriff, what about what he said in his last call?" She shot him a look. "Don't start." But she knew what he meant. Nathan's final words on the radio had been nearly incoherent. Something about lanterns, voices, and the hollow remembering. That evening, Mallory returned to the station to review Nathan's last recordings. His voice, usually steady, trembled as the tape played back. "It's moving. The roots are alive. The children, they're everywhere. Lanterns, so many lanterns." Static crackled, followed by distant laughter. Then came a whisper. A woman's voice this time, faint and melodic. "When the lanterns fade, the hollow takes what's owed." Mallory froze the playback, heart pounding. She rewound, played it again. Same words, same haunting rhythm. But she wasn't alone in hearing it. From the corner of the room, the old office radio flickered to life, though no one had touched it. The same voice whispered again, this time clearer. "You're listening now too." Mallory jumped up, knocking over her chair. The radio went dead. The entire building felt colder suddenly. She stared at the recorder. It was still playing. And now, faintly, she could hear something new, a low humming, almost like a child singing through static. Mallory didn't sleep that night. Instead, she drove out to Reverend Crane's grave. The old church sat half-collapsed on the edge of town, its windows boarded, its steeple leaning like a broken finger. The graveyard behind it was overgrown, headstones swallowed by ivy. She found his marker easily, one of the few still standing straight. Reverend Abel Crane, 1823 to 1871. Beside it, she noticed something strange. A lantern. Iron-framed. Its glass darkened with soot. Mallory crouched, running a hand over its handle. Cold metal. And beneath the soot, faint etchings. Words carved by hand. To guide those who wander the hollow. The second she read it, the lantern flickered to life. She staggered back as the inside ignited, not with fire, but with a pale blue glow. The mist around her began to move, swirling like breath. And then voices. Whispers. Dozens of them. "Help us. Bring him back. Don't let the hollow sleep again." Mallory gritted her teeth. "Nathan," she shouted into the fog. "If this is you, show yourself." But the mist only thickened. The blue light flared once more, then dimmed. When it faded completely, she was holding something new in her hand. A small object. A badge. Nathan Cole's. The next morning, Mallory called in sick but didn't rest. She packed the lantern, Nathan's recorder, and a hunting knife, then drove out to the edge of the hollow herself. By noon, the fog was already curling low again, thicker than before. "All right," she muttered, stepping into the tree-line. "Let's end this." The deeper she went, the quieter the world became. The crunch of her boots softened until she felt like she was walking on air. No birds, no insects, only the faint hum of something unseen, like the forest itself was vibrating. At the heart of the hollow, she found the blackened tree Nathan had described. It loomed like a monument, its trunk scarred and twisted. Beneath it, the ground pulsed faintly, like breath moving through the soil. Mallory raised the lantern. It flickered to life instantly, and the whispers came. "You shouldn't have come. It's hungry. It remembers you." The light within the lantern began to swirl, glowing brighter. It cast shadows across the clearing, long, human-shaped shadows that didn't belong to her. Mallory's hand trembled as she turned the lantern slowly. The air shimmered, and then, faintly, she saw them. Figures. Children again. Pale, translucent. Standing among the trees. She gasped. "What do you want?" One of them stepped forward, a boy this time, no older than 12. His eyes were hollow, but his voice was clear. "The lantern binds us. The hollow keeps us." Mallory swallowed. "And Nathan? Is he?" Before she could finish, the boy pointed downward. Mallory followed his gaze to the roots of the tree. Something glinted faintly among them. She knelt, digging through the dirt until her fingers closed around it. A silver watch. She wiped the mud away and froze. On the back, engraved in neat letters, Detective Nathan Cole. Her throat tightened. "No." The boy tilted his head. He listened too long. The lantern flared, brighter now, searing white light filling the clearing. The tree's bark began to shift, its surface rippling as if something moved beneath it. Mallory stumbled back. "What's happening?" The boy's voice dropped to a whisper. "It's waking again. It needs a keeper." The world blurred. The roots writhed upward, curling around the lantern in her hand. She tried to pull away, but the vines tightened, forcing her to hold it. The light grew unbearable, the heat searing through her gloves. "Let me go," she screamed, yanking against the roots. Then, she heard Nathan's voice. Faint. Inside her head. "Mallory, it won't let you leave. Don't fight it. The lantern must always have someone to bear it." Tears blurred her vision. "Nathan? Are you alive?" No answer. Only the sound of the roots digging deeper, the light pulsing like a heartbeat. Then she saw him, faintly, standing among the children. His face pale, his badge gleaming faintly in the ghostly glow. "Nathan!" He looked at her, eyes empty but sad. "You shouldn't have come." And then he vanished. When Mallory awoke, the forest was still. The sun barely touched the ground, filtered through a ceiling of fog. Her head throbbed. She sat up slowly, realizing the lantern was still in her hand. The glass had gone dark again, but faint blue veins pulsed within it, like something alive. A whisper brushed her ear. "Now you hear us too." She turned sharply. No one there. Her heart pounded as she stumbled out of the clearing, the world around her warped and shimmering. Every tree seemed to lean toward her. Every sound carried a faint echo of laughter. She didn't stop running until she reached her car. When she looked in the rearview mirror before starting the engine, her breath caught. Behind her, standing at the edge of the fog, were the children. Watching. Silent. And beside them stood Nathan Cole. He raised a hand slowly, pointing to the lantern on her passenger seat. Then he mouthed one word. "Keep it lit." That night, Mallory sat in her living room, the lantern burning faintly beside her. She played Nathan's last recording again. The static had cleared somehow. Now the voice on the tape wasn't Nathan's. It was hers. When the lantern dies, the hollow awakens. The cycle begins anew. Mallory dropped the recorder. It clattered to the floor, still playing faint whispers. Outside, the wind howled against the windows. The trees swayed like figures in the dark. And somewhere out in the woods, faint blue lights flickered to life, one after another, stretching deep into the hollow. Lanterns. Dozens of them. Each one marking another soul claimed. Mallory leaned back, her eyes fixed on the glowing light beside her. The whisper came again, gentle this time, almost tender. "You're the keeper now." The flame flickered once, then steadied, and the mist outside began to move again. The fog returned before dawn, thick as milk, crawling up from the hollow like a living tide. It rolled through the fields, over the barns and fences, swallowing the road signs and porch lights one by one. By the time Sheriff Mallory stepped outside, lantern in hand, Coldwater looked more like a ghost town than the place she'd sworn to protect. The glow from the lantern wasn't just light anymore. It pulsed faintly, like it was breathing. Every so often, the blue fire would flare when she walked too close to the trees, and the whispering would begin again. "Keep it lit, keep it lit." She tightened her grip. 3 nights had passed since she'd found Nathan's badge in the hollow. 3 nights since the voice of the children had begun following her home. Now they were everywhere. In her dreams, in the hum of the refrigerator, in the static on her car radio. And every time the lantern dimmed, she felt the hollow watching. At first, she tried to act normal. She went to work, filed reports, talked to Reese about the missing families. But her deputy had begun to look at her differently. His gaze lingered too long. His voice softened like someone afraid to startle a wounded animal. "You okay, Sheriff?" he asked gently on the 3rd morning. She forced a smile. "Fine. Just not sleeping much." He nodded but didn't believe her. "You know, people are talking," saying the hollows cursed. "That may be Cole." "Stop." Her voice snapped sharp enough to cut. "We don't feed rumors." Reese hesitated, then said, "The town council wants to close the North Road. Folks are scared. Kids say they see lights moving in the woods at night." Mallory froze. "What kind of lights?" "Blue ones." Her hand trembled just slightly around the coffee mug. That evening, she went back to the hollow. She told herself it was to gather evidence, to find Nathan's body, to end the stories, but deep down, she knew it was something else. The lantern had begun to hum when she drove past the ridge, like it wanted her to return. And she couldn't shake the feeling that someone was waiting for her. The fog was thicker than ever, pressing close to the windshield as she parked by the old trailhead. Her flashlight flickered weakly in the mist. She raised the lantern. Its glow deepened instantly, stretching out ahead of her like a guide. "All right," she muttered. "Lead the way." The path wound downward, the air colder with every step. The trees grew denser, their branches tangled like ribs. After what felt like an hour, she reached the clearing again. The same blackened tree, the same soil that seemed to pulse beneath her feet. Only now, there was something new. Another lantern, hanging from a branch, glowing faintly blue. Beneath it, Nathan Cole's badge, pinned neatly to the bark. Her throat tightened. "Nathan!" The whispers started again, soft, rhythmic. "Keeper, keeper." Mallory looked down at her own lantern. Its light began to flicker in time with the one hanging from the tree. And then she saw movement. Shapes forming in the fog. Children again, but this time, they weren't alone. Adults stood among them, pale and still. Men, women, faces she recognized. The missing families. The Wilkes. The Pharaohs. Even old Mr. Danner, the storekeeper who'd vanished 2 weeks ago. All standing silently beneath the branches, eyes hollow, lips unmoving. Mallory's heart pounded. "What do you want from me?" The children spoke in unison. "To remember. To guard. To keep the hollow sleeping." She staggered back. "No. I'm not part of this. I came to end it." The voice that answered wasn't theirs. It was Nathan's. "You can't end it, Mallory. You can only take my place." She spun, eyes wide. He stood behind her, half shrouded in mist. His uniform was tattered, his skin pale like the others. But his eyes, they still held something human. "Nathan." He smiled faintly, the kind of smile you give when it's too late for comfort. "You shouldn't have lit the lantern. It marked you." "I can stop this," she said, voice shaking. "I can destroy it." "You can't destroy what the town built to survive," he whispered. "The hollow feeds on what we forget. The lantern keeps it full, keeps it from waking." She shook her head, backing away. "No, that's not true. This isn't real." "Then blow it out," he said quietly. She froze. The wind around them stilled. Even the whispers fell silent. Nathan took a step closer. "Go on. Snuff the flame. See what happens." Her hands trembled. The lantern's blue light danced in her eyes. "You said it needs a keeper," she whispered. "Does. But it doesn't have to be you. he said. His voice softened, almost pleading. If you walk away now, someone else will take it. Someone who won't survive the first whisper. The fog pulsed with movement, dozens of faces emerging. All of them looking at her. The children. The families. Nathan. Each one whispering the same word, over and over. Keeper. 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 Mallory dropped to her knees, the weight of it all crashing down. The hollow wasn't cursed. It was hungry. And the lantern wasn't protection, it was a chain. She remembered Reverend Crane's journal entry Nathan had quoted, "When the laughter ceases and the lanterns grow dim, the hollow will whisper for new souls." That meant, every few generations, someone had to take the role. Someone had to keep the light burning to contain it. Mallory looked up at Nathan. How long? He hesitated. Until the flame dies. She let out a shaky laugh. Then I guess I'd better keep it bright. He stepped forward, his outline already fading into the mist. You'll hear them soon. The ones before us. Don't answer when they call. Why not? Because they'll ask you to trade places. And with that, he was gone. The next morning, Mallory woke up on the ground at the edge of the woods. Her uniform was damp with dew, her hands streaked with mud. The lantern sat beside her, still burning. For a moment, she thought she'd dreamed it all, until she noticed the badge hanging from her belt. Nathan's badge. Pinned neatly beside her own. She stood slowly, looking back toward the forest. The mist had receded. The hollow was still again. But the whispers hadn't stopped. They were quieter now, constant, like breathing just below hearing. Keep it lit, keep it lit. Over the following days, strange things began happening in Coldwater. The fog came earlier each evening, rolling in before sunset. People reported hearing laughter from the woods, but no one disappeared. The town, for the first time in weeks, felt almost safe. Mallory went about her duties, quieter than before, the lantern always burning somewhere nearby, on her desk, in her car, beside her bed at night. When Reese asked about it, she just smiled faintly and said, "Keeps the dark away." But she didn't tell him what she'd begun to see. Sometimes, in the corner of her vision, she'd catch a glimpse of Nathan standing by the tree lean, watching. Other times, she'd see the faint blue glow of lanterns in the fog, like a constellation scattered through the woods. Each one pulsing faintly in rhythm with hers. Each one holding a keeper. By the seventh night, Mallory understood the curse fully. It wasn't punishment. It was preservation. The hollow wasn't evil, it was alive. Ancient. Rooted in the bones of the land. It had taken lives before, yes, but not without reason. It needed balance. A keeper's lantern ensured that balance. If the light ever went out, the hollow would wake hungry again, and it would feed on everyone in Coldwater, not just the ones who strayed too close. So Mallory tended the flame. Night after night, even when it whispered to her. Even when it showed her faces of those she'd lost. Her mother, her partner, Nathan, all asking her to let go. She never did, because she knew what would happen if she did. 1 month later, the local paper printed a brief story. Coldwater Hollow declared protected site. Sheriff Mallory restricts access following investigation. No one ever saw her inside the station after dark again. The townsfolk said she lived mostly in her truck, patrolling the ridges, lantern always burning by her side. Children said that if you drove past the North Road at midnight, you could see her light moving through the trees. And if you listened carefully, you could hear her humming, soft, low, and tired, keeping the hollow asleep. Late one night, long after the rest of the town had gone to bed, Mallory stood at the edge of the woods, staring into the fog. She raised the lantern higher. The blue light spread across the trees, catching faint reflections, like dozens of other lanterns answering her from deep within. She smiled sadly. "Good night, Nathan." The whisper came back, faint but warm. "Good night, Keeper." The fog curled inward, wrapping around her boots, her hands, her face. And as she turned back toward town, the hollow sighed, a long, low breath of contentment. For now it slept. And Coldwater, for one more night, was safe. The morning after the storm was unnervingly quiet. A pale fog lingered over Coldwater Hollow, soft as gauze and just as blinding. From the ridge, The trees looked like dark figures trapped beneath ice. The world hadn't just stopped, it was holding its breath. Sheriff Leland Holt stood at the edge of the old path, staring down into the hollow where the mist gathered thickest. He hadn't slept since the night before, not after what he'd seen in the churchyard, the trail of wet footprints leading to the woods, small and barefoot, vanishing at the old oak. He told himself it had to be an animal. But deep down he knew better. He lit a cigarette with trembling fingers, watching the ember flare red against the pale morning. "Sheriff!" Lena Calloway's voice came from behind him. She was running, her boots crunching the frosted leaves. Her face was pale, streaked with tears and mud. "You need to come," she gasped, clutching his arm. "It's the schoolhouse." Leland didn't ask what was wrong. He could already tell from the look in her eyes. The Coldwater schoolhouse stood near the creek, its windows broken and its roof sagging under years of neglect. It hadn't held a class in decades, not since the hollow first turned sour. The locals said it was haunted by the children who disappeared after the harvest fair of 1953, or maybe by something older that had taken them. Now, the front door stood open. Inside, the air was damp and stale, heavy with the scent of earth and something else, something metallic. On the floor, the desks were overturned, and the chalkboard was smeared with mud. But it wasn't the ruin that stopped Leland's breath. It was the drawings. Hundreds of them, covering every wall. Each drawn in white chalk and faded crayon, stick figures of children, all holding hands in a circle. Their faces were blank, but from the center of each circle rose a single tall figure, sketched in red. Leland's stomach turned. Who did this? Lena pointed toward the back of the room. Her hand trembled. It wasn't there yesterday. But this morning, look. Pinned to the far wall, right above the largest drawing, was a lantern. It was the same one they'd found buried near the Callaway orchard days earlier. But now it was lit. Its flame burned blue. Back at the sheriff's office, Leland tried to piece it together. He'd sent Deputy Farrow to collect the lantern for evidence, though Farrow had looked at it like it was radioactive. Leland rubbed his temples. So we've got a dead preacher, missing animals, a woman who swears she saw a figure walking across the water, and now this? Lena sat opposite him, her hands clasped tight. It's not just drawings. It's a message. Leland frowned. What kind of message? She looked down. It's happening again. Leland froze. He'd heard the stories growing up, the harvest disappearances, the night the children vanished without a trace, the church bells that rang even though the rope had been cut. But those were legends. Warnings whispered to keep kids out of the woods. Except now, the woods were whispering back. That night, the fog returned thicker than ever. You couldn't see 10 feet ahead. Leland's headlights cut through only fragments of it as he drove toward the Callaway farm. He'd gotten a call just after sunset, Lena's father screaming that he'd heard voices in the orchard again. By the time Leland arrived, the man was standing in the yard, shotgun in hand, eyes wild. They were singing, the old man said, pointing toward the trees. Children's voices, Sheriff. I heard them plain as day. Singing that same song my daddy used to hum before the hollow took him. What song? The man swallowed. Ring around the rosy. Leland turned slowly toward the trees. The fog was moving now, not drifting, but swirling, like something underneath it was breathing. Then he heard it too. Faint and distant, high-pitched voices weaving through the mist. A nursery rhyme. Ashes, ashes, we all fall down. The orchard lights flickered. And just as the last word faded, the lantern by the barn burst to life with the same blue flame. Leland raised his gun. Back inside, Mr. Callaway? Now. But the man didn't move. His eyes were locked on something beyond the fog. They're here. Who's here? The children. The words barely left his mouth when a shadow darted between the trees, small, quick, and wrong in the way it moved. Leland aimed his flashlight and caught a glimpse of a pale face, wide eyes, and a mouth that didn't move though a whisper came from it. Help us. Leland stumbled back. The light flickered again, and when it steadied, the figure was gone. Inside, now, he barked, grabbing the old man's arm. But Callaway was frozen, staring into the fog. Leland turned to drag him, and that's when he saw it. The blue flame from the barn lantern wasn't alone. There were dozens of them now, scattered through the orchard like stars fallen to earth. And between them, the fog began to rise, shaping itself into tall silhouettes. One of them stepped forward, and Leland realized it wasn't mist at all. It was Ash. They barricaded themselves inside the farmhouse, bolting the doors and drawing the curtains. Lena was waiting inside, pale and shaking. "What's happening out there?" she whispered. Leland glanced through the window. The lanterns burned brighter, pulsing like heartbeats. In the flicker, he could see the outline of figures standing among the trees. Children, dozens of them. Their faces were blank, their clothes soaked through, their skin gray with dirt. And at their center was someone taller. A woman. Her hair hung long and wet. Her eyes glowed faintly, reflecting the blue light. She moved like smoke, her voice drifting through the fog as she spoke. "You left us," she said. "You promised we'd be safe." Leland's heart pounded. "Who are you?" he shouted through the glass. The woman tilted her head, and for a moment, her features sharpened. He recognized her, the photograph on the old church wall. Agnes Holloway, the schoolteacher who vanished the same night as her students in 1953. Lena gasped. "That's not possible." But the woman only smiled. "You took our names from the records. You buried the truth. But the hollow remembers." The window cracked, frost spreading across it in seconds. Leland backed away. The lamps inside the house dimmed. Outside, the children began to chant again. By midnight, the fog had swallowed the entire valley. Radios went dead. The phone lines buzzed with static. Every light in Coldwater flickered once, then went out. Leland checked his watch. It had stopped at 12:13. He stepped to the window again. The flames were spreading from the orchard to the road, one by one, like a trail of blue lanterns leading back toward town. Lena gripped his sleeve. "They're not just coming for us, are they?" Leland shook his head. "No. They're waking everyone." He turned toward the stairs. "There's something in that schoolhouse we missed. Whatever she wants, it started there. You can't go out there now." Lena pleaded. "You'll disappear like the others." But Leland was already loading his shotgun. "If we stay, we're next." He opened the door, and the cold hit him like a wall. The fog curled around his boots, and in the distance, he could hear the faint echo of a bell, one chime for every year since the hollow fell silent. The schoolhouse loomed in the distance, lit only by the pale blue glow leaking through its broken windows. Leland's breath came out in clouds as he stepped inside. The air hummed softly, like a low note vibrating through the floor. The chalk drawings were gone. In their place was a single message scrawled in large, uneven letters. "Time to remember." He scanned the room, his flashlight landing on the teacher's desk. The lantern sat there again, flames steady and cold. And beside it, an old leather-bound book. The school ledger. He flipped it open, his eyes catching on a list of names. Every child from the class of 53. Except one. At the bottom of the page, written in red ink, was a new entry. Lena Calloway. Leland's blood ran cold. He looked up, and standing at the front of the class was Agnes Holloway. Her hands were clasped in front of her, eyes burning blue. "She was always meant to be one of them," the spirit whispered. "The hollow doesn't forget its own." Before he could move, the floorboards began to creak. The voices rose again, this time all around him. The children. The air turned heavy, the light pulsing like a heartbeat. "Let her go!" Leland shouted. Agnes tilted her head. She was born under the lantern's light. She carries the debt her blood owes. Leland fired. The blast echoed through the hollow. The smoke cleared, but she was gone. Only the lantern remained, still burning blue. By dawn, the fog began to fade, retreating toward the woods as if drawn by an unseen tide. But the town wasn't the same. Every clock in Coldwater had stopped at exactly the same time, 12:13. And Lena Calloway was gone. Leland searched the orchard, the road, the riverbank. Nothing. Only one thing remained behind on the porch. Her locket, open, the photo inside burned away. He sank to his knees as the first rays of sunlight broke over the hills. For the first time in his life, Sheriff Leland Holt understood what the old folks meant when they said the hollow sleeps only when it's fed. Somewhere beyond the trees, faint and distant, a single lantern flickered once and went out. The hollow had stirred, and now it was awake. The next morning, the air over Coldwater was still, but it carried a sound that shouldn't have been there. If you stood outside in the fields, you could hear it faintly beneath your feet, a hum, deep and rhythmic, as though the ground itself was breathing. Farmers left their plows half-buried, listening in frozen silence. Dogs barked at nothing. The church bell rang twice before stopping mid-toll. Sheriff Leland Holt stood by the edge of the orchard, mud caked on his boots and a hollow ache behind his eyes. He'd spent the night searching, calling Lena's name until his throat burned. Now he could only stare at the damp earth, where faint footprints, bare, small and recent, led toward the woods before vanishing into nothing. The fog had receded, but the air felt heavier. Every breath came with the scent of turned soil and something old, like iron and moss. Deputy Farrow pulled up in his truck, tires crunching the gravel. "Sheriff," he said quietly, "you need to see this." Leland followed him without a word. They stopped at the old cemetery on the north side of town. The fog clung thicker here, the ground uneven and soft beneath their feet. Farrow pointed toward a patch of disturbed earth near the back fence. "Someone dug here last night." Leland crouched down. The dirt was freshly turned. But when he brushed it aside, he realized the hole hadn't been dug from above. It had pushed outward, like something buried had clawed its way free. And lying in the grass beside the grave was a book. A small, leather-bound hymnal. The pages were swollen from moisture, the ink faded, but the title was still legible. Songs for the Harvest. Leland turned to the inside cover and saw a familiar name written in looping, feminine script. Agnes Holloway. His stomach dropped. He flipped through the pages. Many were blank, but some had lyrics scrawled in the margins, written in different handwriting. Children's handwriting. We dig, we cannot sleep. The roots have grown, the roots are deep." The sheriff's hands trembled. Each verse was darker, more desperate, the words looping around drawings of lanterns, graves, and faces without eyes. At the very end, a single line had been written in red. "When the hollow sings, the children wake." By noon, the hum beneath the ground had grown louder. It came in waves now, rising and falling like the sea. At first, people tried to ignore it, then the earth began to crack. Outside Coldwater's diner, the asphalt split with a sharp pop, releasing a faint sigh of air. Over by the mill, water from the stream turned black for nearly an hour. The mayor called Leland, voice trembling. "It's spreading, Sheriff. The whole town's shaking. What do we do?" Leland looked out his office window toward the hills. "You get everyone inside. Lock the doors. Don't go near the woods." He hung up, then glanced at the hymnal on his desk. The pages seemed to flutter on their own, even though there was no wind. "Lena," he whispered. He drove toward the schoolhouse again, headlights cutting through the thickening haze. When he reached it, the door was already open. The air inside was colder than before. Dust swirled in faint circles, as if stirred by invisible hands. The chalkboard had changed again. New words had appeared across it in white dust. "She's below." Leland's pulse spiked. He grabbed his flashlight, sweeping it across the room. At first, nothing moved. Then he noticed a pattern in the floorboards, thin, deliberate gaps forming a circle around the teacher's desk. He knelt and ran his fingers along the seams. They were loose. Someone, or something, had pried them open. Beneath the wood was a hollow space, wide and deep. He hesitated, then lifted the board. A damp, earthy smell rose from below, mixed with something faintly sweet, like rotting flowers. His light caught stone steps spiraling downward into the darkness. The schoolhouse had a basement. No one in town had ever mentioned one. Leland descended slowly, every creak of the old steps echoing too long in the silence. The deeper he went, the colder it grew, until his breath came out in pale clouds. At the bottom, he found a small stone chamber. The walls were lined with shelves, and on each shelf sat glass jars filled with water. Floating inside were things that made his stomach lurch, Old ribbons, rusted keys, even what looked like a child's shoe. In the center of the room stood a wooden table. On it lay a lantern, but this one didn't burn blue. Its flame was crimson, flickering with a pulse that matched the hum in the earth above. Leland's flashlight flickered once. Then it went out. He cursed softly, tapping it, but it stayed dead. Only the red lantern lit the space now, casting trembling shadows against the wall. And then, singing. Surrounding him. He turned slowly. The shelves seemed to ripple in the dim light, the jars vibrating to the rhythm of the song. He recognized the tune. It was the same one he'd heard in the orchard. Ashes, ashes. He froze. The floor beneath his boots trembled. Something was moving beneath the dirt. The ground bulged once, then split. A pale hand shot up through the soil, fingers clawing for air. Then another. And another. Within seconds, the chamber was full of them, small, gray hands pushing out of the ground, writhing toward the light. Leland stumbled backward, raising his gun. "Stay back!" A child's face emerged, eyes blank, mouth open in a silent scream. Then another rose beside it, hair clinging to wet skin. "Help us," they whispered. The sound wasn't coming from their mouths. It was inside his head. He fired once, twice. The gunshots deafened him, but the figures didn't stop. They were dragging themselves upward now, crawling from the earth, their small fingers reaching for him. And then, above their chorus, he heard a new voice, clear, soft, and heartbreakingly familiar. Leland turned. Standing just beyond the red lantern was Lena. She looked the same, but not. Her eyes glowed faintly, her skin pale as the mist outside. Dirt streaked her arms and dress. "Lena," he breathed. "You're alive." She smiled sadly. "Not quite." Leland took a step forward. "What did they do to you?" "They didn't do anything." Her voice was calm, almost distant. "I was born from it. From the hollow. I just didn't remember until the song woke me." "No," he said, shaking his head. "You're not one of them." "I am." She looked at the red lantern. "It's the heart, Leland. It keeps them asleep. But now, it's bleeding." The ground rumbled beneath them, and cracks began spreading across the floor. From each one, faint red lights seeped upward, pulsing in time with the flame. "They're coming," she whispered. "All of them. The ones the town forgot. The ones you buried." "Then help me stop it," he pleaded. "Tell me how." She met his eyes. For a moment, something human flickered there. Fear, maybe hope. "You can't stop what's already begun. But you can end it." She stepped closer, and he realized she wasn't casting a shadow. "Break the lantern, Leland. Before the 13th chime." "What happens at the 13th? She hesitated. The hollow stops singing, and starts to feed. The church bell began to toll. Twice. The sound echoed faintly through the earth, muffled but distinct. Leland grabbed the lantern, the heat biting into his skin. The red flame flickered violently, and whispers filled the air. "Don't," Lena said softly. "If you destroy it, I'll go with it." He froze. "You can't have both," she whispered. "The hollow gave me back, but it doesn't give without taking." The bell tolled again, 4th, 5th, 6th. Leland looked from the lantern to Lena, torn. He'd spent his life trying to protect this cursed town, but now everything came down to a single choice. Her, or the hundreds of souls clawing their way out of the ground. The 7th chime rang. "Please," Lena whispered. "Don't let it sing anymore." The 8th chime echoed through the chamber. The red light grew brighter, the humming louder. The hands from the dirt began to reach higher, their pale faces straining toward him. The 9th. He raised the lantern above his head. The 10th. His mind flooded with images. Lena laughing, the orchard in sunlight, the way her voice softened when she said his name. The 11th. She reached for him, tears in her glowing eyes. "I'm not afraid." The 12th. He smashed the lantern. The flame exploded in a burst of red light. The ground shook violently, the shelves shattering as the jars burst, spraying water across the room. The song became a scream. Leland fell to his knees as the light engulfed him. For a moment he saw Lena standing there, smiling through the chaos. Then her form began to dissolve, breaking apart like ash in the wind. "Thank you," she whispered. The chamber collapsed. Hours later, when dawn crept over Coldwater, the hum was gone. The cracks in the earth had sealed. The fog was lifting. And for the first time in weeks, there was no sound beneath the soil. Sheriff Leland Holt was found near the old schoolhouse, half buried in dirt, unconscious but alive. In his hand, he still clutched the broken handle of the red lantern. The mayor said it was a miracle. The people said the curse was over. But Leland knew better. Because that night, as he sat on his porch staring at the orchard, he heard it again, faint, almost tender, drifting through the wind. A child's voice. We dig, we cannot sleep." He closed his eyes, and from somewhere deep beneath the soil, the hollow hummed once more. The morning after the collapse, the town of Coldwater looked almost normal again. Almost. The fog was gone. The birds had returned. The earth no longer trembled beneath people's feet. To anyone passing through, it might have seemed as though the nightmare had ended. But those who lived there, the ones who remembered the whispers, the blue lights, the faces in the orchard, they knew better. Coldwater had gone quiet. And quiet, in this place, never meant peace. Sheriff Leland Holt sat on the porch of his house, wrapped in a blanket, hands still bruised and raw from digging himself out of the schoolhouse ruins. The doctor said he was lucky to be alive. The deputy said the lantern's explosion probably sealed the hollow for good. But the sheriff hadn't slept since. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her, Lena, standing in the red glow, smiling through the dust, then fading away like smoke. And every time, he woke to the same sound, faint, almost imperceptible, coming from the church tower at the edge of town. A single, ghostly chime. By midday, rumors were spreading. The mayor's wife swore she'd seen blue light flickering in the graveyard again. A boy at the diner said he'd found a cracked pocket watch in the mud, one that ticked backward. Pharaoh came to Leland's porch, hat in hand. "You heard about the bell?" Leland nodded slowly. "It's ringing again." Pharaoh shifted uneasily. "Yeah, but it's not just that. It's ringing 13 times every hour. Exactly 13. Starts at midnight, stops before dawn." Leland's jaw tightened. The 13th chime. He rose from his chair, wincing at the pain in his ribs. The words Lena had whispered before the collapse echoed in his mind. Break the lantern before the 13th chime. He had broken it, but maybe too late. "Get your gun," he said. "We're going to the church." The old Coldwater church had stood longer than the town itself. Its stone walls were cracked, its roof sagged with moss, but somehow, it still endured. The bell tower loomed high above the town like a watchful eye. When Leland and Pharaoh arrived, the front doors were wide open. Inside, dust floated in the air like falling snow. The pews were overturned, hymnals scattered across the floor. The bell rope hung still. Leland shone his flashlight upward toward the tower ladder. "Someone's up there," he muttered. "Could it be animals?" Pharaoh whispered. The sheriff shook his head. "No animal rings a bell 13 times." They climbed. The tower creaked beneath their weight. As they reached the platform, the air grew colder. The bell, enormous and blackened with soot, hung above them like a suspended moon. And beneath it, scratched into the wooden floor, were words carved by hand. They didn't hear US. Pharaoh's breath caught. "Jesus." Leland crouched, running his fingers over the grooves. The carving looked recent. The wood splintered fresh. Then he noticed something else, dark stains leading toward the bell itself. Not quite blood. Not quite rust. The sheriff touched one finger to it. It was damp. "Sheriff," Pharaoh whispered. "Look up." Leland raised his flashlight. At first, he thought the air above them was moving. Then he realized it wasn't air, it was dust. Dozens of thin, gray particles swirling in the shape of small figures, barely visible in the dim light. Children. They drifted around the bell like moths. Their faces were featureless, their mouths open in silent song. The bell moved. It swayed once, slowly, then again. A deep, metallic groan echoed through the tower, followed by a low, resonant boom. Leland covered his ears. The sound vibrated in his bones. Another boom. The 13th chime was coming early. When the final toll hit, the sound didn't fade. It spread. Every bell in town, churches, clocks, even wind chimes, began to ring in perfect, dreadful unison. Dogs howled. Windows shook. The ground quivered. "Get down!" Leland shouted, grabbing Pharaoh as the tower beams splintered. The bell roared above them, its metal glowing faintly red. From its mouth poured a stream of black ash, falling like snow onto the wooden floor. And from that ash came a sound, soft, like 100 voices whispering at once. "The soil remembers." Leland fired his gun at the bell, desperate to break it. The bullet ricocheted harmlessly off the bronze. Pharaoh tried to pull him back toward the ladder, but it was too late. The bell cracked open. It split clean down the middle, and from its hollow center, something fell, a small object hitting the floor with a metallic clink. Leland stared at it. It was a pocket watch. He picked it up with shaking hands. The casing was engraved with a name. Holloway. Inside, the clock hands were spinning rapidly in reverse. The singing stopped. That night, Coldwater changed. Time began to slip. The clocks in the diner and the gas station froze at 11:59, while others began counting backward. The streetlights flickered between past and present, one moment flickering LED, the next flickering oil lamps. People swore they saw shadows of themselves in windows, moving half a second too slow. Leland sat in his office, staring at the pocket watch on the desk. The hands spun faster now, a blur of motion. The ticking wasn't steady, it sounded like a heartbeat. Pharaoh entered, face pale. "I think you should see this." He led him to the window. Outside, along the main street, the townspeople were gathering. They stood silently, all facing the same direction, toward the woods. Their eyes were open but unfocused, like they were sleepwalking. And from the direction of the hollow, a faint light began to glow. Blue. Leland grabbed his coat and gun. "Get the patrol car." Pharaoh hesitated. "Sheriff, maybe we should wait for the state police?" "They won't make it in time," Leland said, his voice hard. "It's starting again." As they drove toward the edge of town, the headlights flickered. The closer they got to the hollow, the slower time seemed to move. The second hand on the dashboard clock ticked once every few seconds, then stopped entirely. The forest loomed ahead. Dozens of blue lanterns now floated among the trees, suspended in the air like stars. Beneath them stood rows of children, gray, motionless, staring at the sky. And at their center, standing before the largest oak, was a woman in black. Agnes Holloway. Her face was calm, almost serene. The red lantern glowed faintly in her hands, though it had been shattered only nights before. Leland stepped out of the car. The air rippled around him, the scent of soil and rain thick in his lungs. "Agnes," he shouted. "It's over." She tilted her head slightly. "Over." Her voice echoed through the trees, distant and hollow. "You broke the heart but left the pulse. Did you think that would stop the song? The town's dying because of you," he growled. "The town died long before me." The ground shifted beneath his boots, soft and pulsing like the skin of some enormous creature. The lantern light brightened, and the children began to hum. Their voices were beautiful, haunting. Agnes looked up at the sky. The hollow's 13th chime calls all who were forgotten. It brings time to its end, so memory can begin again. "What do you want?" Leland demanded. She met his gaze, and for a brief moment, he saw something human behind her spectral eyes. To be heard. To be seen. To be remembered. She stepped closer. "Your fathers buried us in silence. Your town built its peace on our graves. But Coldwater's soil remembers every lie it swallowed." The wind howled through the trees. The lanterns flared brighter, and the children's song grew louder. "Agnes!" Leland raised his gun. "If there's anything left of you, stop this." She smiled sadly. "Would you stop the wind from blowing?" The first clock tower struck midnight. Each chime rolled through the valley like thunder. The lanterns pulsed with each note, the earth trembling beneath them. 3, 4. Leland's watch, Lena's locket, his own heartbeat, all pulsed in time with the bells. Pharaoh shouted something, but the sound was lost to the ringing. 6. 7. The blue flames turned white-hot. 8. The trees bent inward, creaking under invisible weight. 9. The air grew thick, hard to breathe. 10. Agnes raised her hands. The soil beneath the children began to crack open. 11. A faint red glow seeped from below. 12. Leland clutched the pocket watch. Its hands had stopped spinning, frozen on a single time. 12:13. He looked up. 13. The world went still. The sound was gone. The light was gone. Everything hung suspended in an impossible silence. Even the fog had stopped moving. Then, slowly, the soil began to rise. From beneath the roots of the hollow, something vast began to emerge. A shape, half-buried and ancient, made of bone, wood, and earth. Not human. Not entirely real. Its form shimmered between matter and memory, as though time itself had grown a body. The children turned their heads toward it in perfect unison. Their mouths opened. The 13th chime wasn't sound, it was them. Their collective breath, their forgotten voices, their grief turned to resonance. The hollow itself was singing. Leland stumbled backward. The pocket watch in his hand burned hot, the metal branding his skin. The ticking started again, this time in sync with the creature's pulsing. He looked down. The name on the watch, Agnes Holloway, was changing. The letters twisted and reshaped themselves. Lena Calloway. Leland's chest seized. The world blurred. Agnes's voice drifted through the air, softer now. Every song has its echo, Sheriff. Every child their reflection. He looked up, eyes wide. The figure before him, the one holding the lantern, wasn't Agnes anymore. It was Lena. Her face was calm, her eyes glowing blue. Lena, he whispered. Time's run out, she said gently, but you can still choose how it ends. The ground split open behind her, red light flooding upward like dawn. The lanterns began to fall, one by one, their flames extinguished. What do I do? He asked, voice breaking. Her lips curved in a faint, almost loving smile. Remember us. The light swallowed her whole. When the explosion came, it wasn't sound or flame. It was silence so complete that the world seemed to blink out for a single, endless second. Then, nothing but darkness. When Leland awoke, it was morning again. He was lying at the edge of the orchard, his body covered in ash. The hollow was quiet. The lanterns were gone. The trees stood still. In his hand, the pocket watch had stopped for good. 12:13. He looked around, heart sinking. Pharaoh was gone. The church tower was gone. Most of the road was gone too. But the air was clean. He rose slowly, staring at the silent woods. The soil beneath his boots was firm again. And somewhere deep in the distance, for just a moment, he heard the faint echo of a child's laughter, bright, unburdened, free. The sun rose over Coldwater for the first time in weeks without fog. Golden light spilled through the shattered windows of the sheriff's office, glinting off the dust that hung in the air like ghostly ash. Birds sang again in the oaks outside. The stillness that had haunted the town was finally lifting. Sheriff Leland Holt sat at his desk, hands trembling slightly as he poured coffee from a cracked thermos. The office smelled faintly of smoke and damp soil. A single photograph, his and Lena's high school graduation, lay beside the cold mug. He stared at it for a long time. When he finally looked up, he saw the pocket watch sitting on the desk. Its glass face was shattered, the hands forever frozen at 12:13. The 13th chime. The moment everything stopped, and started again. Outside, life had returned to Coldwater. Or something that looked like it. But Leland couldn't shake the feeling that the hollow wasn't gone. It was only sleeping. By mid-morning, the townspeople had gathered at the edge of the woods. No one spoke much. They stared at what remained of the hollow, a wide, uneven crater filled with mist and half-buried roots. The old oak had collapsed in on itself, its branches curling inward like blackened fingers. No trace of the lanterns. No trace of the children. The only thing left standing was the old church bell. It lay on its side in the grass, split in two, its bronze face cool and dull. Pharaoh's name was among the missing. Leland hadn't found his body. only his badge, bent and blackened, beside the road. The mayor tried to make a speech, something about community, resilience, and rebuilding, but his voice broke halfway through. The people just stood there, eyes glassy, listening to the wind move through the trees. When Leland turned to leave, he noticed a single daisy growing out of the soil near the crater. Its petals were pale blue. He knelt, staring at it. Beneath the surface, the soil still pulsed faintly, almost imperceptibly, like the heartbeat of something sleeping far below. He whispered, "Rest now." That night, Coldwater slept without fear for the first time in years. The air was clean. The clocks all ticked in unison again. But for Leland, sleep wouldn't come. He walked the empty streets, boots echoing against the pavement. Every window he passed reflected his face, sometimes exactly as it was, sometimes not. In one, his reflection smiled faintly when he hadn't. In another, it turned to look behind him. He ignored it. He'd learned long ago not to look too closely at mirrors in this town. He found himself standing outside Lena's old bookstore. The sign had been torn away in the storm, but the front door still hung loosely on its hinges. Inside, everything was as she left it, the shelves lined with forgotten novels, the smell of old paper and candle wax heavy in the air. Her lantern still sat on the counter, cracked but whole. He ran a finger along the glass. The flame inside flickered faintly, even though there was no oil. "You said to remember you," he murmured. "I do. Every day." For a moment he thought he heard a woman's laughter, a soft, familiar sound. When he turned, there was no one there. The following morning, Leland received a letter. No postage stamp. No handwriting he recognized. It had simply been slid under his office door sometime during the night. He opened it carefully. Inside was a single page, written in neat, looping script. "Sheriff Holt, the Hollow remembers what it is owed, but it no longer hungers. You have kept your promise. You have seen us." When the 13th chime sounded, the clock was reset, not to the past, but to peace. Coldwater will heal now, though the soil will always hum our names. There is no curse left here, only memory. Treat it kindly. Holloway. The ink shimmered faintly as though written in moonlight. When he turned the paper over, there was a faint outline of a handprint, small, like a child's. He folded the letter carefully and tucked it into his pocket. A week later, state investigators arrived. They found no sign of any underground structure, no evidence of explosions, and no explanation for the night Coldwater's clocks all froze. They called it a localized seismic anomaly. The people of Coldwater didn't argue. They rebuilt their homes, reopened their shops, and refused to speak about what had happened. The story became something whispered only by old men on porches and passed between children who dared each other to walk near the woods after dark. But every year, on the anniversary of the 13th chime, the entire town gathered at the hollow's edge with lanterns of their own. Blue ones. They didn't say prayers or make speeches. They just stood in silence and watched the light move through the mist. It was late that night when Leland visited the cemetery for the first time since the hollow fell. He carried a single lantern, the cracked one from Lena's bookstore. Its faint blue flame swayed gently as he walked between the gravestones. He stopped before a fresh marker near the back. Deputy Samuel Farrow. He placed the lantern down beside the stone. "You did good, Sam," he whispered. "You stayed." The wind shifted, carrying the faintest sound of laughter through the pines. Leland smiled. As he turned to leave, he noticed movement near the trees, a small figure standing in the distance, half hidden by fog. A girl in a white dress. She raised her hand and waved once before fading back into the mist. The years passed quietly. Coldwater changed with the times. The orchards grew thick again, the river cleared, and the hollow became part of local folklore. Teenagers told stories of the woman with the red lantern and the sheriff who fought the ghosts of time. But Leland knew it wasn't just a story. Every so often he'd drive out to the edge of town, park his car by the dirt road, and listen. On calm nights, when the air was still, he could swear he heard it, an almost imperceptible rhythm beneath the soil. The pulse. Alive, but dreaming. He'd tip his hat and murmur, "Sleep easy." Then he'd leave before the clock struck midnight. One autumn, many years later, a young journalist named Mara Dean came to Coldwater to write a feature on America's haunted towns. She interviewed the older residents, people who remembered strange lights, vanishing children, and the night the bells rang 13 times. But when she went to see the hollow for herself, she found only a peaceful meadow covered in wildflowers. The crater was gone. The ground was smooth, untouched. At the center of the field stood a single oak tree, new and young, its bark pale silver in the sunlight. Beneath it was a small wooden sign, hand-carved with simple words, "For those who waited to be heard." When Mara touched the trunk, she felt a faint vibration, like the earth itself was breathing beneath her palm. She smiled, stepped back, and whispered, "Guess some ghosts prefer quiet endings." As she left, the wind moved through the leaves, carrying a whisper so faint it could have been imagination. "Remember us." That night, in the sheriff's old farmhouse, now long abandoned, something stirred. The cracked pocket watch still sat on the windowsill, untouched for years. When the moonlight hit it just right, the glass caught the reflection of the oak tree miles away. For a moment, just a moment, the second hand twitched. Tick, then stopped again. Leland Holt was never found after the 13th anniversary of the hollow's collapse. His truck was discovered by the edge of the woods, headlights still on, door open, engine cold. Inside, on the passenger seat, was a note written in his careful handwriting. "If they ever call again, don't be afraid to listen. They're only trying to be remembered." Beside the note sat his badge. And next to it, the cracked blue lantern, burning softly with a steady, impossible flame. And so Coldwater lived on. Peaceful, quiet, rebuilt. But the locals still say that if you walk the old forest path at midnight on the anniversary of the 13th chime, and stand very still, you'll hear it, the faint toll of a distant bell that doesn't exist anymore. 13 notes. So gentle, like a lullaby sung for the dead. And if you listen closely after the last one fades, you might hear something else. A sigh carried through the trees, as if the hollow itself were finally at rest. The hollow sleeps,